All right. Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Advocate LSU Sports Update. I am Wilson Alexander, joined by as always, by my colleague Leah Vann. Leah, how you doing today on this Wednesday afternoon?
I'm wonderful. I went for a morning run. The weather was perfect. It was 60 degrees this morning, so I'm loving it.
It does feel good. It does feel good, which just makes it even more unfortunate as we're heading into fall that kickoff next weekend against Tennessee is at 11 a.m. and that we don't get to just walk around campus all day. But I guess we'll all get over it eventually. Obviously, before else you can get to that Tennessee game, that sort of anticipated, ranked matchup, got to go through Auburn first. And this is a game that is usually weird with earthquakes and fires and last minute kicks and just usually a bizarre atmosphere. And so, but this Auburn team looks like it should be a game that LSU wins. I think this point spread is up to about like 9.5 last time I checked in LSU's favor, which is surprising going on the road. But we're going to get into that game and into that matchup here at the end of the show. But some of the little LSU aspects that we'll start off with here. Joe Fouché in the secondary. The big change kind of coming in that back end of the secondary this week. Joe, an Arkansas transfer, is off of a 4-game academic suspension that related to his credits transferring from Arkansas with an issue there. That's cleared up now. He's going to be back on the field, and it's really important because Major Burns, who had been LSU starting safety, is out here 3 to 6 weeks with an upper neck injury. Leah, how do you think that this change in the secondary is ultimately going to affect LSU?
Yeah, I'm curious to see how the communication is with Fouché back there. Is it Fouché or Fuchsia? Have we figured that out?
We should have asked him yesterday, frankly.
Yeah, we should have asked him yesterday. But I'm excited because I know that he will be so excited to play, and I just feel like he's going to have a certain fire to him. But the fact that he has experience playing with Greg Brooks, I'm curious to see what the two of them bring and how how they'll attack. I don't know because I don't know how Auburn is also not very good at passing the ball in the first place. So with these guys back there, I think we're going to see some turnovers. I think that's what I'm going to see.
It is interesting, those two, because Greg Brooks was mostly a nickel at Arkansas, and that's actually kind of, when he first came to LSU in the opener, he was at nickel as well. And then, they made the change, moving him back to safety and putting Jay Ward up at nickel, and that was really helpful for that communication aspect. And now, you've got him and Joe right next to each other at safety, assuming anyway that Jay, stays at nickel and they put Jark Bernard-Converse back at corner. He moved to safety this past weekend against New Mexico, but it was kind of it seemed anyway like a temporary stopgap. He can move around, but he's probably your best corner. And so, but like you said, this is kind of a game that's going to come down to the trenches and being able to stop the run. But I actually think that having Greg and Joe back there sort of helps LSU in that because those guys are physical. We haven't seen it out of Joe yet at an LSU because he hasn't played, but you could see him laying down some pretty hard hits in spring practice, even a couple times in the preseason. You look back at his Arkansas tape, he did a lot of that. And then Greg, you've seen him just fly up from his spot at safety to make tackles at the line of scrimmage in space. He sort of throws his body around like a missile sometimes. And that physical element, I think, is going to really help them in this game in particular. We'll see in terms of like pass coverage once we get into that Tennessee game like next week, how they'll be able to do. But like you said, Auburn, it doesn't really throw the ball deep and doesn't really have a dynamic passing game. Doesn't have much of a dynamic offense at all, really. And but it does, I think, going to help, at least in this game in particular, that they're so physical around the line of scrimmage.
I'm curious to see how LSU will stack the box a little bit against the running game, which will obviously be a source of strength with Tank Bigsby and as your running back, and then potentially probably Robbie Ashford, a dual threat quarterback who can also take it and run, and especially given the weather conditions that we're fixing to see this weekend, I anticipate there being a lot of running. And so I'm curious to see how much we even will see of like the secondary, getting to kind of show its stuff. So yeah, I'm curious to see how the defense will shape.
Yeah. The other thing about Fouché, I think you mentioned like his experience right off the bat. I mean, he's, a fifth-year senior, originally out of New Orleans from McDonough 35 High School. He's played in 44 games, started 34 times. And so this is a guy, like when Brian Kelly was asked about him earlier this week, he sort of brought that up right off the bat. It's like he's got experience. And so there might not be a big drop off from Major Burns, other than that Major was a really good communicator. So we'll have to see how it kind of plays out there on the field itself. Obviously, also LSU looking at another change on the offensive line. Brian Kelly confirmed this morning that Garrett Dellinger, the left guard who started the year as LSU center, he's got a hand injury. Had to undergo surgery on Tuesday. There was a plate and some screws put into his hand, and he is doubtful, Brian Kelly said, for this game against Auburn. And that's, you thought finally, like it would be another third game in a row where LSU would be able to use the same offensive line, get some cohesion, which you wrote about, earlier this year, how important that is. And now he's out, or at least expected probably to be out. Listed as doubtful right now, and just because that timeline is so tight, it's going to be hard for him to get back for this Auburn game. We heard Brian Kelly say how they're going to kind of shift things around. Miles Frazier's going to, assuming Dellinger can't play at this point, move from right guard to left guard, and then probably looking at Anthony Bradford as your right guard again. But I guess just what does this do to LSU's offense? Because going into SEC play, what do you think this kind of does to? It looked like 3 weeks in a row you'd be able to have the same lineup and start to find that cohesion, and now if you got another guy who might miss a game.
Right, but I think especially with Anthony Bradford in the lineup, it is still also the same guys, like for the most part. Yeah, you're missing Garrett Dellinger, which is a huge like physical presence on the line that obviously will be missing the guard position, but you also Anthony Bradford's still a big dude, and he was probably going to play at right guard anyway. And then as far as moving Miles Frazier, who we hear is very versatile, I mean, he's played on left and right side in his career, and also at guard and tackle. So I think that him moving over to kind of take over for Garrett, I think he can do it, obviously. I mean, it seems like he's played every position. I think he was primed to play left guard at one point. But I think, obviously I think Miles is shorter, and he's a little smaller, I believe, than Garrett. So as long as he is able to hold his own at that position. I mean, he was playing guard last week, he was playing tackle, so never mind.
Frazier was the right guard last week, yeah.
Yes, okay, so he was right guard last week. Okay, so yeah, I mean, as far as change in footwork, it shouldn't be that much of a difference for him.
Right, yeah, and Frazier, like you said, because Brad Davis does so much cross training with these offensive linemen. Like, this is why they do all this cross training, is for situations like this. I mean, you're kind of seeing why. I mean, part of the reason is to let's find our best five. The other reason is when we have an injury, let's be able to slide some guys around and hopefully not have a drop off. And we'll see that really put to the test for the first time in this game, because Miles Frazier, has played some left guard, he's played some right guard, he's played some right tackle. So it's not going to be completely foreign to him. But like you said, I mean, Garrett's 6'5", 320, and Brian Kelly always liked the size. Like I asked him earlier this week about Charles Turner at center, and Charles is going to kind of get his first really big test here coming up against some SEC linemen as an undersized guy. But Brian Kelly said one of the things about it is he's always on combination blocks with the guards, and you've got Anthony Bradford or Miles Frazier, who are pretty big, and Garrett, who's pretty big. And so I'm also curious to see how that's going to affect Charles at center, like not being able to have a combo block with a guy right next to him who's 320 pounds. Like you said, maybe it won't be too much of a big deal. Maybe we won't notice it at all. But it's certainly something to watch heading into this game. And I mean, do you think it affects them really like throughout the season though? Like, first SEC, if it's just one game, like it's maybe expected to be at this point, that this is something to really be concerned about? Or do you think the concern level is kind of low in terms of how it shapes the overall offensive line throughout the rest of the SEC schedule?
I think, we obviously have seen this offensive line against one SEC team so far. So I think, it's kind of hard to measure how good or bad this offensive line is, which or you expect it's going to be better than it was against Florida State, right? And also you've got different guys playing, and you don't have Garrett at center. I think that Charles Turner at center has made a world of difference on the offensive line, to be honest. But I don't picture it being I think Auburn has some tough edge rushers as far as Derek Hall and Eko Leota, some of the best in the nation. But as far as like the interior, they play it mostly a 3-4. Their defense is actually a lot like LSU's, where they mix it up a little bit. So I don't know, as far as, the guard position, I think that there's not a lot to worry there. I think I'm interested to see actually how just how the offensive line overall can stop these edge rushers from coming in and taking on Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, let's start diving more into that sort of Auburn matchup here, what LSU should expect. When you look at this Auburn team overall, I see a defense that's pretty solid. I mean, it's ranked fairly well in most metrics in terms of ESPN's SP Plus, which measures efficiency and just total defense and some of those different statistical categories. They got beat real bad by Penn State, but I mean the whole team just kind of got blown out there. But offensively, they just do not look good at all. And obviously, there's a lot going on with Brian Harsin, the head coach right now. A lot of questions about his job status. When you look at this this Auburn team, I suppose there's a reason LSU is favored on the road by over a touchdown. What do you see when you evaluate this Auburn team?
Right. And I think another concern that I've been reading about is that Auburn's offensive line is also not very strong, especially in pass protection, which is not helping its quarterback situation. And then you've got a really good running back, but also not very good at blocking for the run. And Tank Bigsby has not really matched his production that he's capable of having. I think he's only rushed for, I actually had it pulled up, but now it's gone. Yeah, he's actually rushed for 295 yards so far this year. So, and that's through 4 games, which is, that's like fine. He is still averaging 4.9 yards per carry, which, okay, first down pretty much after twice, but like, he's not exactly, he's not really up to par. I think he struggled against Penn State a little bit. But if you look at, and I was like, okay, well, how good is Penn State really, right? When they were traveling to Auburn, and Penn State right now has the number 33 ranked offense. They're number 33 in total offense, according to the NCAA. LSU's at number 22, but remember they played like Southern, they played New Mexico. So that's a little bit inflated. So, and then you've got Auburn, who's number 89 in total offense, which is pretty low. And especially given the conditions, especially given the uncertainty at the quarterback position, I think that Robbie Ashford is probably going to scramble and run a lot, kind of like what Jaden does, because this is just not their strongest unit right now. And with TJ Finley, 7% of his pass attempts have been intercepted this year. That's 4 interceptions on 53 attempts. It's not very good. So it's going to be a hard time for them. And I think that there's a reason that LSU is favored. And that is because if Penn State can handle them the way that they did, I think that LSU should be pretty confident.
I would agree. I mean, Penn State might be further along as a team right now, but LSU, this is a game where, like, as we said at the top of the show, like, this is historically, this is just like a weird game. Like it always is. There's usually something interesting or strange, or like, it should be a blowout and it's not, or rarely is it just a game that doesn't come down to the wire. We saw just last year, Bo Nix and his magician legs and running all over the place. Like it's usually weird, but LSU is favored for a reason here. And I think it should be. Let's go a little bit further into Auburn's quarterback situation there, because there's, I think, a few things that are interesting to touch on. One, TJ Finley update there. Of course, the former LSU quarterback from Ponchatoula. According to AL.com, Brian Harsin said this morning that TJ's day-to-day. AL.com reported this afternoon he has a grade 2 AC sprain in his right throwing shoulder and is expected to miss the game, which would be sort of second year in a row where it looked like TJ Finley might start against his former team. And now, like you said, Robbie Ashford most likely. He's a dual threat guy. Brian Kelly actually earlier this week in his press conference, because Robbie was listed, as you wrote today, number first on Auburn's depth chart and all that, sort of mentioned Robbie first as like the guy that that they're kind of preparing for, and then said, okay, we'll get ready. We'll be getting ready for both. But I think we're expecting Robbie Ashford anyway. But it's kind of interesting. LSU's got a running quarterback as well, Jaden Daniels, who's so dynamic with his legs. And we kind of heard some of LSU's defenders talk about this yesterday, that, you've got a lot of quarterbacks in the SEC these days, in college football these days, who can run. But because of Jaden's dynamic running ability, this probably won't actually be an issue for them in terms of prep. They can go up against a guy who's just as dynamic running the football, and especially because they're going to go one-on-ones this week, Brian Kelly said, because of the similarities with Auburn's defense and LSU's defense. And so this actually might give LSU a really good idea of what to expect when facing Robbie Ashford.
Yeah, I agree.
What else Robbie, We also mentioned the weather in this game. Obviously, Hurricane Ian is coming up through Florida right now, and so our thoughts are with everybody who's being affected by that hurricane, because we all know here in Louisiana just how devastating those can be, and it's going to, in terms of the game, get up into the kind of the outer edges of it, could affect the weather in this game. Auburn, the National Weather Service in Birmingham, as recently as yesterday, said that low impacts from it are expected in the area. There could be wind gusts up to 30 miles an hour and some heavy rain possible from Friday morning through Saturday night. Do you think that would maybe change this game, or almost even the playing field a little bit, if it ends up being kind of wet and soggy and sloppy?
Yes and no. I mean, LSU also, I don't know how much they actually practice in the rain, but there was a lot of rain in August. So I would think, like, being Louisiana boys, they're probably well prepared for wet conditions. And obviously with the 30-mile-an-hour wind gusts, like I said, we're probably going to see a lot of running. And even like Robbie Ashford, I think he only attempted 18 passes in the win over Missouri. So they were playing pretty run heavy anyway. And I think you're going to play a little bit more conservatively with a backup, as opposed to maybe TJ Finley a little bit, even though TJ hasn't been super successful at passing the ball anyway. But especially since he is a dual threat, we're going to probably see a lot of running in the trenches and also running around the perimeter. But, LSU, of course, its strength is also on the edge on defense. So it's going to be pretty tough. I don't know. I mean, from what I know about Auburn so far, it could be a really rough time. But for LSU's offense, it also could be rough too, because it really hasn't been largely that tested. And, New Mexico had a respectable defense, but they still put up 38 points. And then, the only true challenge was like Florida State and Mississippi State. And LSU fared pretty well. And then I feel like Jaden Daniels has had time to get more decisive and get more confident in his ability and in this offense and playing with these guys. I think he's going to have a really good game. So it's really hard to say that like LSU's going to lose this game, but you never know. The special teams thing is a real concern for LSU. Obviously you got to make those kickoffs, and we might be seeing Nathan Dybert doing the kickoffs, true freshman, and then Damian Ramos still missed a field goal last week. So, I think that could actually, if LSU is going to lose, it's going to be probably a special teams error. Something I saw on Auburn's program was that they have like the longest streak of not having a punt blocked. So they have that going for them.
They have something. They can hang their hat on something. Otherwise, they almost lost to Missouri. They should have lost to Missouri last week. They kind of just barely squeaked out in overtime in that game. With, of course, Missouri's running back fumbling as he sort of shifted and reached over for the goal line. This is a program that looks like it's in disarray, has been for really since last year. The end of last year, there was a messy situation with whatever was going on there with Brian Harsin and internal investigations and all that. And then it come out this year and they squeaked past San Jose. They got blown out by Penn State, and then they barely beat Missouri. And it would actually be kind of some interesting symmetry of, this time a year ago, Ed Orgeron's on the hot seat. The Auburn game sort of helped seal his fate in a way. Of course, it wasn't, actually really started initiated a week later against Kentucky, but it'll be kind of just sort of that interesting sort of symmetry of a week later that a loss to LSU sort of does the same thing with Brian Harsin at Auburn. But we'll have to see how it plays out. Like you said, I think LSU should win this game as well. But strange things happen on the plains. We'll be out there for that game. First true road game for LSU as they kind of start this SEC gauntlet. 6 p.m. Saturday night at Jordan-Hare Stadium. We'll have all your coverage from that game at theadvocate.com and NOLA.com. You can find Leah on Twitter at @LVan_sports. Do I have that right?
Yep.
There we go. I'm over on there as well. You subscribe to our newsletter and join us here every Wednesday afternoon as we preview the rest of the season. It's going to be a lot more interesting, I think, over the next few weeks as we get into the SEC. The really thick of it with Tennessee and Ole Miss and Florida and of course, starting with this Auburn game. Brian Kelly said earlier this week, this month will tell us a lot, and it's certainly going to. So we'll have you covered with all of it, and be sure to check us out over there. For Leah and everybody else at The Advocate, I'm Wilson Alexander. This has been The Advocate's LSU Sports Update. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.